G'day folks, it's Phil from 15 Minute Guitar Practice. Today I'm asking the question, do you know chords? And of course your answer is, bro, of course I know chords. You know, I've been playing them for years. Yeah, but do you actually know chords? Not G, C, D and E, but how chords are built, what ingredients go into them, what makes them different to other chords, that kind of stuff. Because just in the way we learn guitar, and this is kind of inescapable, by the way we learn guitar, it gets tricky, or maybe some people find it confusing when they need to start learning the ingredients of chords and how chords are built, because the way we learn guitar is we typically pick up one of these, we pick up an acoustic guitar, and the first thing we learn is a bunch of open chords. We'll do maybe a G, and a C, and an A, you know, because that's our kind of pathway into learning, and we strum a few of these. Nothing wrong with that, and absolutely vital that we start there, because we couldn't really start with bar chords. You could do, but you know, this helps get our finger strength up and gets our awareness and gets our timing and all of that. But the problem is that when we learn this is a G, what we're doing is associating the name of something with a certain finger configuration and a certain place on the fretboard. Now that can be tricky and problematic later on for some people, because what we've not done by learning that this is a G is actually learn why it's a G, what makes up a G, and what makes a G, for example, different to a G minor. So this is what we're going to talk about today. So to make a chord, the official rules are you need 3 notes to make a chord. Okay? Now, this is hundreds and hundreds of years ago when the fathers of modern harmony made those rules, okay? They didn't really foresee rock and roll coming, and they didn't really entertain, well, they didn't know about power chords, triads, okay? So, you know, I kind of think that 2-note chords are valid also in the modern age, but the official rules, 3 notes to make a chord, 3 different notes. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're like, well, if I play a G, I'm playing all 6 strings. That's 6 notes. So what are you talking about? 3 notes, dude. Well, you are playing 6 strings, but there are only actually 3 different pitches contained in those 6 notes you play. So, for example, the 3rd fret of the E is the same as the 3rd fret of the top E. And the 2nd fret of the B string, for example, is the same as the open B string, your 2nd string. And so on and so forth. So there are actually only 3 different pitches contained within your G chord. 3 ingredients to make a chord. Now, what are those ingredients? We're not going to talk about note names here. We're going to talk about intervals and scale degrees. So one of the prerequisites of understanding how chords are built really requires you to know at least one shape of the major scale. Just, you know, this one. Okay, now we're not going to use that as a scale or to play it, or, you know, we're actually just going to use the major scale as a tool to help us build and unlock other things. And if you don't know already, the major scale is kind of like the tree of life. Okay, everything pretty much comes from that, grows from there. It allows you to unlock this stuff. So, back to our chord. To make a major chord, you need how many ingredients? Okay. The way we build chords is with this pick one, skip one, pick one, skip one method. And that means you take all the notes in the scale and then you selectively pick one, then you skip the next one, then you pick that one, and then you skip the next one. So you start by picking the first one, and then you skip the second, so you don't bother with that one, and then you pick the third, skip the fourth, and pick the fifth. So you end up with these three intervals, okay? These 3 scale degrees. Now those are the only 3 ingredients you need to make a legitimate chord. Now another thing you need to know is that although we've got first, third and fifth note in the scale, you can actually put them in any order. It would still be a legitimate G major chord. So it could be first, third and fifth. It could be third, fifth and first. It could be fifth, first and third. All of those, it's the same ingredients, make the same chord. Okay, the important thing here is understanding that pick one, skip one. Pick one, skip one. Okay, so that's for a basic chord. Now we're going to explore some other chords and why they're different and what changes in them in a sec. But how we build chords is we start with 3-note chords. There's several families of them. I'm going to show you which they are. But when we get up to more complex chords, basically what happens is we take that 3-note chord and then we add an extra note on top. Okay? And then when it comes to 4-note chords, it's that 3-note basic building block chord plus that extra note you added. And if you want to add another one on, you do. And all these are basically the pick one, skip one. So for example, a major chord would be 1, 3, and 5, like we just said. A major 7 chord would be 1, 3, 5, 7. A major 9 chord would be 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. And so on. You go 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11 to get 11th chords, and 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13 to get 13th chords. So the chord, or the chord family, takes its name from the last number, if you want. So a 13th chord, because you go 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, is called a 13th chord. So there are actually 5 levels of chords, and they increase in complexity because you keep adding one note on top of your existing notes. All right, let's go back to our major chords. Remember what the ingredients were, what scale degrees, what scale numbers we put into a major chord. Yes, 1, 3, and 5. Now for a minor chord, only one thing, only one thing changes. The 1 and the 3 are exactly the same. This stays and this stays. But what changes is this third. This is the interval of a major third. Okay, but for a minor chord, it's a shorter distance. So you flatten this note by a fret. And that gives a distance of a minor third interval or a flat 3. So this is the only thing that makes a minor chord a minor chord. So what you should learn from that is the third of a chord is very important because some intervals are more important than others, and the third is extremely important because if it's a 3, it's a major third, it's a major chord. If it's a flat 3 or a minor third, same thing, different name roughly, then it makes a minor chord. So that's the only thing, that's the determining ingredient whether that chord is major or minor. So the third of a chord is very important. And I'm sure you've heard in other lessons about, targeting the third of a chord. And that's why thirds are very important. Okay, so we've talked about major chords, which are 1, 3, and 5. We've talked about minor chords where this note is flattened to make a flat 3, and then you get 1, flat 3, 5. There are 2 others. One is the augmented, which is kind of like a major chord, as it has a 1 and a 3, but then it's got a sharp 5 or an augmented 5th. So, okay, sounding a bit weird, but they are used and they are legitimate chords. And the 4th one is the diminished chord, which is kind of like a minor chord in that it's got a flat 3. It's got a 1, flat 3, and a flat 5. That's a really dark, spooky one. Okay, so for our 3-note chords, we have 4 families, really. We've got major chords, minor chords, augmented chords, and diminished chords. And they all contain 3 different pitches. And because they contain 3 different pitches, they're called triads. Like triangle has 3 sides, triads has 3 different pitches. One of the other things that we struggle with, and I think we kind of know this but we don't join the dots, is that although this is a G note here at the 3rd fret of our bottom E string, there are several other places to play the exact same note. And while we kind of know that, oh yeah, we could play the G in several places, what we don't seem to join up is the fact that because that G occurs in several places on the fretboard, and so do the other notes that make up that G chord, it does mean you can play a G in more than one place, in 5 or 6 different places. And those 5 or 6 different places all require you to put your fingers in a different shape than this one you've learned. So it kind of freaks people out because they thought they knew G. Hey, I know G, it's like that. Or you could do it like that with just pinky and those 2. I know G, man, I've been playing it for years. And then they find out that they only know 1 out of 6 Gs. They're kind of like, oh man, that's like 6 times more work than I thought it was. And they kind of panic. Okay, there's plenty of places to play a G. This is one of them. And there are lots of other options. If you want to play exactly like the record, then you do have to find out which G the original artist played by trying to find a performance video, or looking at the tab, if the tab's reliable, or using your ears to hear the difference between that kind of G and this kind of G. You know, there's clear difference there, but it's the same chord. Oh, of course, so those 5 or 6 different ways of playing a G chord tie in with the cage system, if you're familiar with caged. So let's talk about the next level up from triads. Okay, the next level up from triads contains 1, 3, a type of 3, 5, and a type of 7. It's a 4-note chord, okay? We're going 1 up in their level of complexity. 4-note chords are called what? Remember I said they're called whatever the last number is, okay? So we've got 1, 3, 5, 7. So they're called 7th chords. Now, I always thought 7th chords were just like, well, it's an A7, right? It's the 7th chord. We kind of drop the full name of that 7th chord. This is a dominant 7th chord. A lot of people just call it 7, A7, D7. Full name, D dominant 7. The reason some people put in the word dominant is to distinguish it from other 7th chords in the 7th chord family. Now let's go through them. Remember, we start with a basic building block of those triads. We always start there. So whatever complex chord that you can think of at its heart is one of those 4 triads. It's either going to be a minor triad, a major triad, a diminished triad, or an augmented triad. Or it might be some other things, but general rule of thumb is pretty close to assume that. So taking a major chord, we've got 1, 3, and 5. To make a major 7 chord, we just add a 7 on top. So we count up the major scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we add that to our G. Okay. Now it might not be the note here. It might be an octave higher. It might be that note. Because if you want to play an open G major 7, you would have to play that. Okay, so that is just that note an octave higher. So that might affect your fingering. You can play a G7 there, you can play a G7 there, you can play one here, and you can play one here, and a few other places too. Okay, but a major 7 chord is 1, 3, 5, and 7. Notice it's got 1, 3, 5 in it, which was our major triad, and it's got one more note on top, and that's the 7. Okay, so let's take dominant 7. A dominant 7, quite similar to a major 7 chord, but with one adjustment. Okay, it's got a 1, it's got a 3, and a 5, but the difference, the dominant chord contains not a 7, but a flat 7. So you got that. That kind of sassy sound. Bluesy, sassy, gospely, whatever you want to call it. And while I'm on that subject, it's important that you develop your own adjective to describe what you hear, because when you have this, oh, that sounds sassy, that means that you can, when you're listening to other people's music and you hear a chord that sounds sassy, you know that that chord is a 7th chord, a dominant 7th chord. Okay, so a 7th chord, a dominant 7th chord is 1, 3, 5, and flat 7. Okay, then we have a major 7 chord. Did we do major 7? We just did major 7. What am I talking about? Sorry. Let's do a minor 7 chord. A minor 7 chord, again, starts with a minor triad of 1, flat 3, and 5, because that's what makes a minor chord. And then we add a type of 7 on top, but it's not the major 7. It's the minor 7, or the flat 7. So a minor 7 chord is 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. And lastly, well, not lastly, but we've also got the minor 7 flat 5, because that's literally what you've done. You've taken a minor 7, and this is the 5, and you flatten that 5. Oh, not very good. It's better to finger it like that. There you go. Okay, so that's our 7th chords. Now, I'll go over the others in another video, but these are the ones that are more harmonically interesting and kind of cool, and you can play those. I often play the extensions like the 11ths and the 13ths when I'm accompanying other guitar players who are just playing basic chords. By basic chords, I mean ones with triads in them, just 1, 3, and 5, or maybe 1, 3, 5, 7, maybe they're playing 7th chords, but I tend to play those extensions. Now, some of you probably thinking, okay, well, there's 7 notes in my scale, so where are we getting 9, 11, and 13 from? Okay, good question. These are the notes in the 2nd octave, okay, and only some of the notes. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 1. It's the octave of this one. And after 8, you have 9. Now 9 is exactly the same as the 2, apart from it's in the higher octave, okay? So if you need to add a 9, here's a major 9. It is a 2, but it's not the 2 that's 2 frets away from my root. It's actually the one that's much higher up. So that distinguishes it. Okay, so you've got 9. The 10 is the 3, okay? So that's less important. The 11. Okay, the 11 is the same as the 4, but because it's in the upper octave, we call it the 11. And we've got 12, and then 13. 13 is the same as the 6. Okay, so if you're doing a 13th chord, for example, technically you're supposed to play all the numbers from 1 to 13, odd numbers, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, to get a major 13 chord. But with guitar, you've only really got 4 fingers, and you can't play 6 or 7 notes with those fingers. So what happens? Well, it's counterintuitive and kind of weird, because all I've said so far is about when we make chords, we start with 3-note triad and then we add stuff on top to build these chords. But what we actually do on guitar when we have these complex chords is to start leaving out some of the intervals, some of the notes get dropped, man. They have to extinguish their flame and leave the island, because you need fingers for some of the important intervals. So for example, with a dominant 13th chord, I would fret it like this. Now, for it to be a 13th chord, it needs the 13 intervals, so the 13 intervals got to be in there, right? Okay, we talked earlier about a certain interval being very, very important in determining the tonality of a chord, and that was the third. So the third has to be in there also. Okay, now in this particular fingering, the root is included. You might think, well, the root's the most important, but it might be if you're just playing you and your guitar. But if you're playing with other people, another guitar player possibly, or more often a bass player, then the bass player will play the root note, so you then have a spare finger to play one of the other intervals. But in this fingering, I'm playing it. Now, the only other thing included in there is the flat 7. Because remember, it's a dominant 13th chord. So, dominant 13th means it's basically a dominant chord, which is 1, 3, 5, and flat 7, plus the extra sprinkles on top. That would be, in music theory, would be the 9, the 11, and the 13. Now, we don't have enough fingers to do the 9 and an 11, so we're just playing the root, the flat 7, okay, because the flat 7 gives it that dominant sound. So we've got 1, 3, flat 7. We've missed out the 5. Now the 5 is one of those intervals that's actually not that important. It thickens up the sound, but it doesn't actually add any color to the chord. So we can leave that out, which is why we have done. So we've got 1, flat 7, then the 3, and then the 13. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it here for part 1, but in part 2 we'll explore the 9ths, 11ths and 13ths. But for now, if you've got any questions, then please drop a comment below. If you liked this video and it helped you, then click the like button, and if you haven't subscribed, hey, it would be great if you could subscribe. When I get round to making these, you'll be the first to know. Alright guys, this is Phil from 15 Minute Guitar Practice saying bye for now. Cheers.